You're not even 40, and you've lived more in your 39 years than most people live in 5 lifetimes. You've been in the Royal Marines, SAS at 21. You've been to the North Pole. You've been to the South Pole. Now you're in talks, you're launching an app, and you're in talks with a tech giant about a collaboration. And now you've decided to write a trilogy of books. Now, if I'd done all that, I'd have my face up over primetime television, and I want the world to know that I'd done this. Why, Ray Carole? Why won't you come out of the shadows?
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest questions people ask me, especially close friends, relatives. If someone said to me, "It's commercial suicide. Why don't you just use your real name? Why don't you expose yourself to for all the marketing purposes?" It's all down to who I am. I always talk about authenticity principles. Now there are other people out there which show their faces and do certain things, and that's great. That's their personality. Me, very authentic, principle based. An absolute privilege to have spent those years in the Marines and obviously British Special Forces. What I feel comfortable with is being that person in the shadows. This is something I'm taking professionally. Writing, screenwriting, obviously with yourself, and we've got a number of projects we're working on. This is a new vocation which I hope will last a number of decades. So I'm getting off on the right foot, how I want to be perceived by the public, and most importantly, how I feel comfortable with the public. And it is, as we are now, having this interview, facing the darkness. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to hide who I am. A couple of Google searches, you find out who I am, just for the stuff that I've done, which has been publicated across a number of news platforms. So effectively, it's the brand. This is Ray Carole, okay? Here's a guy who is in the shadows, he's comfortable, he's done a hell of a lot of stuff in his life, but that's just who I am, and that's who I'm always gonna continue to be.
Okay. And the clinic, which I read and was certainly blown away by elements of it, why this book?
Yeah, again, what leads to that is why the expedition to the South Pole. Now, the book's inspired by a real event, and I've just completely mashed it up where you might have been questioning the sanity of the writer when you were reading it. Years ago, I decided I was going to try and be the first person ever to go to the South Pole and back solo with no support or assistance, nearly 1,500 miles. The expedition I actually started, but with a delayed weather window, I only managed to have time to get to the South Pole, which was 715 odd miles, and there wasn't enough window to get back. So years down the line, everyone's asking, why aren't you doing keynote speaking? Why aren't you writing personal development stuff? And it's just not my bag. But I loved writing. I loved the big screen, and it just come to me actually. Why don't I try and make something which involves this lone man on his own, an ex-military sergeant called Stuart Brooks. And he's on this journey to master his mind, to kill off the demons, all the stuff from the past, and then let's really change a gear and then turn it into a conspiracy theory, which is obviously what you read about.
Yeah, which is absolutely my bag. I mean, we're not yet working on this, but I hope one day that I can persuade you to adapt this, because I think it's a terrific premise. In terms of when you were out on the ice, what was your biggest battle?
It was similar. I'd say it's similar to obviously the fictional character in the book. It's one of those things where it's you sort of fear solitude. You want to come up against it. It's a test against yourself. There's only one sort of enemy in your own mind, and that's you, the true you, without other people around you. And that's only, for me, it's the final test going down there. And it's not to do with the external environment. It's all to do with the internal. I mean, my iPod broke on the second day. I had whiteout for 11 days where I couldn't see anything, but still kept skiing. So the amount of clatter going on, obviously, in your mind is unbearable. Sometimes you can control it, sometimes you can't. And hence that's why the real psychological concept called the clinic was something that I actually made up years ago with, I was looking at performance psychology. It's all these negative rhetoric in your mind. How do you control it? How do you negotiate with it? And that's why I termed it the clinic. Anything in my mind which wasn't conducive to a successful outcome was basically an invader, a trespasser. So if I knew I could identify it straight away, either negotiate, work with it, or destroy it, then it was done. And that's why I just called this little nagging voice the clinic.
What demons did you take out onto the ice, and how did you cure them?
Now, what the fictional character took out on the ice is completely separate to what the real life me took out onto the ice. For me, it was a search of a mental masterclass. It was me to develop skills, mental skills, which I could then bring back and share with people. What Stuart Brooks, the fictional character, took onto the ice was what's very common. It was a case of, has war destroyed his mind? Is he struggling with PTSD? Has he got some sort of mental illness? Is he just missing the void of action? This is a guy who's struggling. He's got a lot going on to the point where he's, you know, in the book, as you know, he's almost killed himself because he just can't, this riot in his head, he can't control it. But then he decides, I'm gonna beat this, okay? I'm actually gonna come up with an idea where it's a foreign entity in my mind. And hence, we have the overlap of non-fiction meets fiction, where he calls it the fear. And effectively, he decides in the book, I'm going to stress test the fear, I'm going to take it to the coldest, most barrenest place in the world, and I'm going to have it out with him on the ice. And I'm going to basically regain my sanity.
Right, but the big conspiracy twist is the fear in his head is not something that's come from his experience, it's been planted in, and he's been subject to subliminal mind manipulation and coercion.
Yeah, what he discovers on the journey, he's always questioning his sanity, whether is he sane, is he insane, these thoughts and this conspiracy, the fact that years ago maybe he was a part of some sort of test pilot program, some subliminal program that's unknown. And again, he starts piecing together previous years in his lives and seeing how people around him started behaving strangely. So he starts piecing this thing together. But you've got to remember, this is a guy who's been now 30 days in Antarctica, he's walked 500 miles, he's exhausted, he's paranoid now because he's thinking about this stuff. But he literally thinks he's pieced it together. In knowing that he may die of exposure, he makes this one video diary call to someone that he trusts, telling them his whole conspiracy theory, what he thinks has been done to him, what he thinks exists in real life. And it's that one video call that gets looked at from a very dark room, and that one person says, "We've got a problem, boys. This guy is onto something." And effectively, that is where the book's set up. I wouldn't want to tell you anything more about that, because obviously that's what the Great Read's all about. But the biggest challenge with this is I've created the book out of real events, real characters, and then I've then said, okay, right, Ray, how can we make this into a fictional story using all these people, all the same timelines, and make it a thriller? Because that's the real challenge. If I just had a blank canvas, I think I could write a book, you know, in 6 months to a year for a first draft. That one took longer because I just had to really fit all the pieces together.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts, psychological, the thriller engine of the bad guys coming after him on the ice, and then the twist of what really happened in the past.
Yeah, and also, and it's the setup as well, with it bearing in mind this is, I've already started writing the Trace, and you get the first chapter of the Trace at the end.
The Trace is the second.
Yeah, it's the sequel at the end.
Right.
And again, it's I saw another book, and I saw that they too had the first chapter of the second book, and I thought, what a great idea that is. And the feedback I've had off that is the first chapter of the Trace pieces together a lot of missing information from the actual the initial clinic, and the amount of sort of praise I've got for that is in Christ. You know, we get it now. We've read that first chapter, we get this whole thing, and they can't wait to obviously read the second episode.
The second part in the trilogy. Okay, I've been very fortunate to get a galley copy of this. When can the public get hold of the clinic?
Yeah, again, I put it out there for, again, you've got to put your head above the parapet, see what the initial feedback is. Again, I'm proud to say, you know, I write all of this myself, and I would have it no other way. People have said to me, why don't you get a ghostwriter in? Why would I want a ghostwriter in? Why would I do that? You know, why would I give you a signed copy of my book knowing I hadn't written it? That's not me. That's just not principle centered. That's commercially driven, and that's not me. So the answer to your question, I'm hoping it would be spring 2018.
Are we talking Amazon? Are you going to put it up on there?
At the moment, so we're in negotiation with a publisher, or we may go down a hybrid route, really. And it's all, in all honesty, the whole reasoning behind this is all to do with flexibility in the time that I can put on projects. As you know, I'm a very busy person, and it's not disappointing people and not delivering on timelines.
Can I ask you one question there, Ray? For our fictional characters who go from 2003 to 2009, they have a massive character shift and arc, and the way that the high tempo operations and some of the things they see and do affects them. How was Ray Carole in 2003 different to Ray Carole in 2009 after almost a decade of war?
Yeah, how was he? You definitely, I mean, the irony of the whole Iraq campaign is the irony is we thought we were going to be there for 10 or 11 days, and then effectively it's almost 10 years later that you're still sort of knocking about in Baghdad. It affects people in a completely different way. I was very, very lucky to have gone through a whole campaign over a number of years, and certain parts enjoyed it, certain parts hated it. Very, very up and down sort of journey. Get to the end of it a little bit exhausted with it, in all honesty, a little bit bored of it, which you might find impossible to believe. Why would you be bored in going after tier 1 terrorists around the world? You do. Hence that's why I made my choice at 31 as a sergeant to try bigger and better things in my own life, really. But other people were different, as we know. There's true. Document, Ben Griffin, for instance, a member of the SAS, come back off one tour, decided he was going to be a conscientious objector because he didn't like what he was seeing or doing out there, or the whole conflict as a whole. So definitely affects different people. I was lucky; I managed to go through on a sort of almost, I say, a level plane, but effectively I had had enough by the time it come to sort of making that decision to leave. Really, and there's no regrets about that.
When divers come up from deep sea diving, they have to decompress and they have to come up slowly. Do you think your trips to the South and North Pole were that decompression from war?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I thought I was going to go into coaching and be a performance coach and use my past experiences to work with professional athletes. That was my plan. That didn't really work out like that. Even though I was offered a job with one of the top consultancies in the world to do that. No, I missed that void. There was a void of elitism. There was a void of daring. There was a void of death, which you might find weird. And again, that's why I was drawn to the North Pole, South Pole, because it was that element of fear of death involved. And as I've said to you before, when it looks at expeditions, when I look at an expedition, I won't even get involved if I know there's not that initial fear of actually dying. Because if you haven't got that fear of dying, then psychologically, the battle is actually quite easy. It's a physical and a very easy mental battle. When you've got the idea that you're on your own and there's possibly death knocking on the door, that psychological battle, the gear shift's like 3 or 4. That's what makes real pioneers.
Fucking A! That's great! Isn't that good, guys?